We'll be starting in 1 minute.
Deborah, are you hitting the record button on that, or are you going to give me instructions?
I'm going to let you do it.
You ready? Hi, I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Directors of the Mercer Island School District to order at 6:03, and we'll start with establishment of the agenda.
I move we establish the agenda as published.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Oh, and there was, when we get to the consent agenda. Okay, so we'll start with public input. And we have one public input. You can go ahead and step up to the podium and I'll read our announcement. This meeting is a meeting of the board in public. If you would like to address the board on a particular issue, please limit your remarks to not more than 3 minutes. Appoint a spokesperson if the concern is a group concern, and if desired, provide written documentation to the board secretary in order to be included as part of the official board minutes. The board may direct the superintendent to respond to the issues expressed at a later date. And we have Jeff O'Mara. Thank you.
Hello, school board. My name's Jeff O'Mara. My wife and I have girls in the 6th and 3rd grade. We are new in town. We moved from Palo Alto 2 years ago. The awesome school district here played a major role in us choosing Mercer Island. And the good news is our kids are having a great experience in school so far, knock on wood. The standout thing for me is the 5th grade musical at the end of the year at Island Park Elementary. If you haven't seen it, you need to go. It's Hamilton with 11-year-olds. It is fantastic. Like many parents and like each of you, I am concerned about school safety. First thing though, it's important to acknowledge that our kids are safe when they are at school. They are safer at school than when they're buckled into their car seats or, lordy, when they're 16-year-olds behind the wheel, right? The district has an awesome partnership, perhaps best in nation, with the police department and a great resource in youth and family services. Those are fantastic. I've met with a lot of parents. District administrators. Donna was very generous with her time, as was Ed Holmes, as was David Hoffman. I'm sure you guys know there's a lot of energy around this issue. My discussions have been trying to determine what might be actionable. I've been collecting information about what's going on related to the safety in each school building, and I think there's an opportunity. I'd like the school district to have outside experts conduct a safety audit of all the school facilities. Think of it as very similar to the annual fire safety audits, inspections that happen. This is actionable and affordable. It's possibly zero cost and has a potential to actually save costs in the future. The facilities audit is consistent with the intent of entering into the Regional Threat Assessment Cooperative that's on your agenda for later in this meeting. And I think overall the goal is to provide an evidence-based set of priorities for each facility that can help focus the safety discussion, all that parental energy, on some of the specifics ranked by experts and how they fit into the community priorities and standards. I see this would leverage the expertise of what's already in place. That's awesome. Youth and Family Services, partnership with the police department, the school district. This would be something that could be run under the direction of Ed Holmes and Tony Kuhn. We're going to meet when jury duty is over and get this sorted out. And as a matter of fact, in my discussion with Ed Holmes, MIPD may have the resources in-house to conduct this audit themselves. Anyway, I'm new in town. I don't know how the school system operates. I know that it produces great students and great outcomes. I'm willing to do the legwork, and I'm looking for your guidance on how this could be best accomplished. Thanks for your time and consideration. If you have any questions, I have 36 seconds left.
Thank you. Superintendent Kolaski, did you want to make any comments?
None at this time, as Jeff mentioned. He's been in contact with myself and Ed, and is meeting with Ty and Tony next week, and our safety plans always continue to evolve every year.
Thanks, folks.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other public input at this time? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item D, we have recognition for National Teacher Appreciation Week. Donna?
So annually, the National Teacher Appreciation Week is generally the first week in May. All of this began back in 1944, when political and education leaders began discussions for a day to honor teachers. In 1953, Eleanor Roosevelt persuaded Congress to proclaim National Teachers' Day. It started in 1980. And then the National Education Association continued to observe Teacher Day on the first Tuesday in March until 1985, when, in, I'm sure, collaboration with the National PTA, they established Teacher Appreciation Week as the first full week of May. And that is that occurs before our next meeting. So we wanted to make sure that we put the recognition out there before our next meeting, and the PTA is calling it VIT, Very Important Teacher Appreciation Week, May 7th through 11th, 2018. And if you are prone to hashtags during that week, hashtag Thank a Teacher is the social media contact for Teacher Appreciation Week.
Thank you. All right, our next item is a linkage and study session with the community and taxpayers. And I'm not seeing anyone present. Was the intention we were going to sit there if we had audience members, right? So did we have anything that we wanted to state publicly at this time for our viewers at home? Or is it was we were just going to look for feedback, right?
We were going to look for feedback. I can share with the board that Kendall, as putting out the notice, because we got as much notice as we could. We had a separate piece in the reporter, but Kendall received an email from a community member who said she wasn't going to be able to be here, and her topic of discussion had actually to do with social emotional learning. And so Fred has already reached out to this parent to hear her thoughts and share with her what we are doing within social emotional learning at this time as well. So that was the only one outside of this realm that we had heard from.
Great, thank you. So if there are no objections, we'll just move on with the agenda. Okay. So item 4 is partial governance process monitoring. The first item is a board planning, OE6, budgeting and financial planning state funding update. Are you ready? Thank you, Ty.
Thank you. Excuse me. Good evening, directors. Let me get this a little bigger. Last meeting, we presented a few facts and said that we would bring additional information to the board about the impacts of the supplemental budget 6362 and what it means for Mercer Island. And this is the update for you and the community members about what the impacts of the supplemental budget mean for us, as well as kind of a short, very quick forecast of what it will look like in the future, as well as some updates on assumptions and our general planning for the next year's budget. This is the multi-year tool from OSPI. It's a newer tool that they've started putting out. It started with 2242 last year, the McCleary fixed budget that was put out. This provides a base year, and then the options that have been presented, and then finally on the far right, it's the conference budget, which is the enacted budget. And this provides perspective of what the different plans would have accomplished and what has been accomplished. With the introduction of 2242 at the beginning of the 17-18 school year, we had projected about $5.5 million additional revenue for school year 2018-19. OSPI is projecting about $9 million above 17-18 for 18-19. So moving on quickly to the next slide. This represents roughly about a $3 million increase over what we had anticipated in terms of net revenue from the state. And I'm saying roughly $3 million because OSPI uses different enrollment numbers than we do. Their enrollment projections are a little bit more generous than what we use. We use a fairly conservative enrollment projection because we don't want to over-project revenue or project enrollment, which drives revenue, as well as our model has been fairly accurate, as I've spoken to a few meetings ago. Now, the reason why we're getting more money in 18-19 is the state Supreme Court essentially told the state legislature, hurry up and just get it done. You need to fund the salaries now. We said September 1st, 2018. We didn't say September 1st, 2019. So they are rolling forward. They are cutting down the 2-year phase-in of salaries that had been in the previous budget down to a 1-year phase-in. So this gives us a little triangle of extra money when we look at the graph, and we'll look at that in just a minute. But there is an increase this year, but it flatlines in terms of state revenue for the next few years. Now, the reason, the main driver of this additional money is salaries for staffing that's provided by the state. They've increased the salary allocation provided for teachers and classified staff members and certificated administrators. And one of the challenges that we're going to be facing is because we are now being tied to basic education for funding for basic education staff, we are also going to be needing to consider how are we financing our administrators and our classified staff. Because they are allocated to us from the state, they are therefore basic education. So we need to start looking at what are the costs that are associated with teachers and administrators and paras and security staff and nurses, and how are they being funded by the state, and therefore we need to drive dollars into those buckets. And this has really been one of the first years that we really need to take a look at how much we're spending here, how much we're spending there, and having to really divvy up the money that we're getting from the state. Because we will need to be reporting to the state how much we are paying each teacher out of basic ed and out of enrichment. Excuse me. Now, coming with this increased salary money is also the employer portion of taxes and benefits. So as salaries are increasing, payroll taxes increase, as does retirement subsidies provided by the state. So some of this money that we're getting is directly related to money that we remit to taxing authorities and retirement funds, as well as increases in healthcare benefits. The state is upping the benefit by about $23 per funded FTE. That's a good chunk of change. As well as large increases to CTE, special education. The multiplier for special education has changed, and we are going to be getting about $900,000 more for special education, which is going to be a fantastic help as our population has been growing in the last few years. As well as a few other categorical items. Now, just as a final, as I mentioned, this is kind of a one-time jump. We are not getting increases beyond this from the state. And we had initially planned under 2242, there was going to be that 2-year phase-in, a step increase. We've now taken a giant step, and it's now plateaued for a while. There will be small increases related to inflation, but as of now, there is no plans for additional increases beyond that. Do you have any questions at this point?
So for the, you said 900,000 for special ed.
Yes.
So that could be spent partly on certificated special ed teachers and partly on classified staff, is that correct, or other?
It is, there is not
Expenses.
FTE that is associated with special education funding. It's used as part of a calculator for special education funding, but it's not directly tied to what we get. So we could use it for classified salaries, we could use it for certificated salaries, we could use it for specialized services, for contracted services.
So it's not directly tied to a specific
It's not
thing.
directly tied
We
to a
can
specific thing.
Use that as discretionary.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Just a comment. So this is a one-time kind of injection of additional money, and I think it's just important to kind of emphasize that we did spend down our fund balance last year. That's an opportunity to bring it back up, because I think if we were to have done another construction project, that eventually we'll have to, without that fund balance being at where it used to be at, this community saved about $9 million in construction costs for that. So just recognizing that, as well as we did make cuts last year, I think, in instructional coaches, as well as some other things. So there's opportunities to bring back certain things.
And as we get further along into the budget development process, right now we're still working on getting our staffing plans developed. Once we get further into that, that's more discussions that we can have about, what's left in the bucket. Is there a program that we want to revive? Is there a program that we want to enrich? So there's definitely options that we have moving forward. Additionally, one of the impacts coming from the supplemental budget was the advancement of the professional day inclusion. Starting in 2018-19, we will be getting 1 day of professional development funding. That increases to 2 days in 1920 and 3 days in 2021. So we are receiving additional money from the state to provide time for our teachers to improve their professional practices, which is a fantastic help, and it's one of the first times that we've gotten this support directly from the state. And we have great plans to use it well. Additionally, the bill, when they built the 2-year phase-in, there was a cap placed on 18-19, a CPI cap that would prevent increases in salaries beyond the CPI inflator, to kind of keep people from jumping too far ahead, in other words. As they've advanced the salaries, they left that cap in place. So there is still a 3.1% cap on salary increases to all groups. So the certificated teachers, the administrators, the non-reps, the classified staff. There is a 3.1% cap on what we can increase their salaries by. The levy rate that we inflate, so our new levy rate, instead of being based on a percentage of our expenditures as it has been for years, is now $2,500 per student. That was originally going to be inflated by IPD, the inflationary measure of IPD. It is now going to be inflated by the inflationary measure of CPI, which is a more generous inflator. So we appreciate that greatly. The IPD will still be the inflator for the state-based revenues and calculating the minimum and maximum salary limits that have been set within the bill. So here we have the table of what the state is funding us at in terms of, as a budget driver, what we're looking at for revenue per FTE that is funded to us. instructional staff, 65,216. Certificate administrators, 96,805, and classified 46,784. So the base salary that we are now restricted to paying and the maximum salary that we are now restricting to paying is 40,000 at the bottom, and the max is 90,000. Then we can inflate those by IPD, and then we will have the option of increasing based on regionalization. So we are not necessarily restricted to those 40 and 90, but those are the legal, we can't go any lower than 40,000. And where we are right now in our salary schedule, we are well above that, and we are within those goalposts in terms of minimum and maximum. This is just a chart that also from OSPI's multi-year tool that just kind of highlights the differences in revenue in terms of what pre-2242 and 2242 and 6362 has given us. So for 1819 under the old system, we would have been looking at about 35.5 million in state revenues. Under 2242, 42.5, and under 6362, 46.4. And as you can see, our local levy rates have been decreased significantly. So I took a look at, are there any questions at this point before we start looking at this graph? All right. So I took a look at what the per student revenues would look like based on the changes in between 2242 and 6362. Man, it's a mouthful. And what it looks like on a per student basis. You'll see that there's a dotted line underneath these two top lines. And the dotted line represents the 2242 revenues. And as you can see, it kind of steps up into this funding from the state, and it just essentially plateaus. It would have been a nice gentle curve. Now there's a pretty steep step. And this triangle is what I've been referring to as a one-time money. It's this extra little bump that we had not been anticipating. As you can see, this third line down, the light blue or the medium blue line, is the local taxes. And you see that per student, it decreases significantly to about $2,500. And as we look at the 1920 year on a total revenue basis, there is this reduction in total revenue. And that's driven by that reduction, that step down in taxes, because tax years don't align with school years. So we will be moving from the existing formula. I believe we're for 2018, we are collecting 16.8 million. In 2019, we're looking at about 10.5 to 10.7 million. So there's a significant reduction in money coming in, and as that step down overlaps, we'll just be moving into a more flat $2,500 per student range. So that's also part of the discussion that we're having is this one-time bump up before the levies fully filter out into the new formula, and it flattens out a little bit lower than the peak. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. Just a quick update on some of the assumptions that we're using in our budget planning. We have no changes to our initial projection of enrollment. We're still looking at a full-time enrollment for the district of 4,393.53. So just under 4,400 students. OSPI's projection was about 4,450, so a little bit higher. Equates to about almost $700,000 in revenue. So there's that's part of the driver of the discrepancies. As I mentioned, the state allocation has increased, and there's no rate increases from our insurance company. In fact, we are eligible for a discount if we renew the contract before May 31st. So that would equate to about a 1% reduction. We had anticipated that we had guarantees that it would not exceed a 10% increase. So the fact that we're not increasing at all, we're actually getting a reduction. It's awesome. So this is going to be great news for all the staff and means more money in their pockets. Other identified needs that we're having to look at as we move through the planning stages that have come up since the initial assumptions that we've driven put into the budget. Adding additional staffing to IMS to meet and the high school to meet security needs. We were upping the FTE at the high school to make sure that we have 2 full-time security liaisons and adding a full-time security liaison at the middle school to help with student supervision and providing security. We're seeking your approval for an interlocal with the Puget Sound Education Services District to participate in a regional threat assessment cooperative. And we'll be talking more about that in the next item. But myself and Director of Maintenance and Operations Tony Kuhn and Special Education Director Lindsay Maitich attended a training at the ESD, and we were all blown away by this model. It's a fantastic model, and if we really apply ourselves, it's going to do great things for our kids. So, as well as upgrades to our communication system, we're looking at upgrades to communication. Excuse me. We're looking at upgrade to our radio system. We've had Motorola in our buildings looking at updating the radios that we use to communicate between buildings in emergency, as well as looking at how well our cell reception is within the buildings and potentially adding additional repeaters or boosters, all in an effort to help us communicate more effectively in emergency situations. We're also looking at tools that would help us as a district communicate with the community and the families that integrate better with our system and have more efficient access to contacts, and would provide not only text messages, but robo-dialers and emails, so that there's multiple channels of communication going out if there's an emergency or if there's a school closure. We're also looking at additional support staff for programs and district level departments. There is an increased need for professional development, and there's an increased need with the transition of some of our leadership team as Director Wright is leaving, and I completely lost her. Director Prescott is coming in. Future Director Prescott is coming in, as well as changes in special education staffing. We've had a number of retirements, and we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge. So we're needing to add some additional staff, as well as staffing at the buildings in terms of special education and other programs. And just looking at additional training and program development in terms of professional development, there's some fantastic opportunities that Superintendent Klosky has been looking at in terms of what can we do to drive the professional development in our district and make us a more efficient learning environment. So with that said, do we have any additional questions?
Thank you very much for this update. I think there were, I think as Director Jorgensen had mentioned, there were a great number of things that were cut previously. It looks like you've got many of them listed here, as well as items that have come back to us from the community as an output from the drills we've had and things like that. So I think looks like we're using these funds very, very wisely, as well as the 3.1% we've allocated for teachers too, teachers, staff, administrators. I guess the whole bucket. So I think it's a great update of how we're improving our basic education standing based on this one-time bump of money. So thank you very much for your detailed analysis.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I think it's great news, and we're celebrating it. Feels like McCleary is settling down, and it's unexpectedly amazing, I think, in a lot of ways, that this is all happening at this time. So thank you for keeping us updated on all of this, and look forward to seeing how the rest of it plays out. So,
Yeah.
all right, so you get to stay up there for our next item. So, and that was just a discussion item. This one is an action item. So we've got OE9, communication support to the board regarding the Puget Sound Educational Service District Regional Threat Assessment Cooperative.
So I am going to turn this over to Ty. As he mentioned, 3 staff members went to an introduction to this. This is a brand new co-op, and so when you look at the agreement, there's some different numbers on there because the document that we've attached is a commitment by us to participate. There is still some provision that if the co-op doesn't get enough members, that we could still choose to say we're not going to participate. This is sort of just an intent. They're trying to see how many of the districts that they're working with, which from King and Pierce County, are interested in participating. So this is sort of an intent to participate at this point. Ty.
So the Regional Threat Assessment Cooperative, we're already a member of the PSESD's School Safety Cooperative, and this is part of what they've brought to the districts that are already part of the cooperative, is this additional option. What it is, Salem-Keizer in Oregon, the school district, had some extreme needs in terms of the students at risk of violence. They had a high number of students that were engaging in violent activities and violent behavior, and so they took a look at what options they had, and they developed this model over, I would probably say about 18 years, I think, and it's been spreading as more districts see the benefits of it and are adopting it. And how the model works is you have tiers of intervention and assessment. When a student is identified as being a potential threat to others, and this isn't necessarily a threat to a building, this isn't a threat to for suicide or threat to a facility or general safety. This is a specific individual that has been found to have some potential for violence. And how do we handle this individual? And the model that they came up with is, as I mentioned, tiers of intervention. The initial tier looks at the student and the context of his life or her life, and what are the contributing factors around them. It's a very consistent system, and the model comes with a series of questionnaires as you move through the tiers of intervention that allow the investigator or the psychologist or whatever staff member is working with them to use a very consistent approach in terms of the questions they ask. What is the nature of the violent behavior? Where on the violence spectrum does it fall? Have they made an overt threat? Is it a reactionary threat? Is this a reactionary violence? Do they have a history of violent behavior? Has the violent behavior been escalating? And it's a very consistent set of questions that look at not just the behavior of the student, but it starts to expand into the student's life. What are the contributing factors? Is the student being bullied? Is there problems at home? Have they been writing notes? Do they have access to weapons? And it's a very introspective process. At one point, once you reach a certain number of questions that you've looked at, it asks you to stop and reflect on the questions that you've answered. And if you feel that there's a significant threat, then it asks you to proceed. Once you are done looking at the student and the circumstances around the student, it provides a number of options that have already been pre-populated for the district staff that you can delete out or add in and customize. But it provides individual options, school-based options, family options, community options, in terms of how do we intercede and interject supports to prevent these threats and violent behaviors. If the threat of violence has been deemed significant enough, we move on to the second tier of intervention, where we would bring in YFS and MIPD. The model that they look at is a cooperative model between not just the school district, but health resources within the community, as well as law enforcement, corrections. They have a wide cooperative of agencies that come together to provide services for these students in terms of mental health counseling, diversionary programs, to help them find ways to add additional supports and tools to work with these students to keep them from becoming violent students or from falling into these violent behaviors. We have a fantastic relationship already with YFS and with MIPD. This cooperative and this model would allow us to make it a much more formal process and would also hopefully induce more discussion and back and forth between the different agencies in terms of how we interact and how we serve our students.
I would also like to weigh in a little bit. In my conversation with Lindsay, our special ed director, about this, she had also been at the training, as Ty mentioned, and she was very impressed and felt that this model would allow us to have more of our processes in-house and therefore save dollars on things that we currently contract out to other entities that are experts. We'd be able then to follow this step-by-step protocol and keep our employees working with the students and keep it in-house versus contracting it out.
With that being said, I'm sure you have a significant number of questions. So, are there questions?
Thank you for doing this. It looks like a really good program. It sounds very, very prevention-oriented and best practice-oriented. I'm hoping that the number of other districts also choose to participate, just to bring the overall price to us down, because if they don't and we're participating with a small denominator, then it starts getting into significant dollars, and then we can have to look at trade-off. Would a person be better than that amount, or partial person? But I'm going to assume other districts are going to buy into this as well. So that's great. You mentioned working with YAFS as well as the police. Does this fee cover them in a way, or are they going to be expected to chip in as well?
It covers them.
Good.
The money that we're going to be providing to the cooperative will be used to pay for a full-time employee. And this employee will be the linchpin of the cooperative that provides training to all the agencies that become a part of the cooperative in terms of school districts and mental health counseling options, as well as police departments and corrections and all the different agencies. They will become the facilitator for that process of getting the networks of support built.
Great questions. Thank you. Go ahead.
In terms of the cost per FTE, our district seems to fall way under the numbers. So how would that work for us? Unless I'm not understanding it.
So
Yes, okay.
Do you want to go ahead?
It's the combined district. It's all of the members of the cooperative together in terms of how many student FTE there are. So as we see, the more districts join, the cheaper it gets.
The cheaper it gets per district.
Per district. Yeah.
I have kind of a general question here. So I'm hearing about cost savings, and I'm hearing about protecting the district and streamlining these policies, which is great for our staff and all that. What I'm interested in is what perceived impact it's going to have on our individual students. Is this going to create a better model of service for individual students who are dealing with certain social emotional issues? And do you perceive this as being a step up in services provided?
I believe it would be a step up in terms of services provided for our students, because it's all about the individual student. The model that they've designed and they've proven over the years is that it takes all of these different resources and it looks at how do we provide support for these students to keep them falling into these patterns of violent behavior or completing these threats. And it looks at how the number of supports that are already available and how do we add additional support to it. So it's all about improving the quality of education and life for the students that would be served by this model.
It also has built into it, when you look at the big binder that I brought back, there's an early intervention piece to it that once staff is trained at the site level, they'll be able to feel more adept at identifying and intervening as they're asking these questions and going through this model and process. It's kind of like a flow chart of if-then. And as they are trained and become more adept at that, I think it's going to provide an earlier and quicker response when red flags go up for individual students.
Yeah, it sounds to me like they've probably based this on a lot of the evidence of what we know about students who have committed violent acts in schools and what could have been done to prevent this. And it sounds like a very supportive model, not punitive, but to try to help prevent these kinds of acts. So I think in that way it'll be difficult to measure if it's at 0 and it stays at 0, but I think that it sounds like these are the things that we need to do to help protect the individuals that commit those acts as well as those who could be potential victims. Thank you. Sounds wonderful.
Do staff members from this cooperative work with Mercer Island students? Is that the
No,
intent?
the cooperative would be a training tool. They would be the facilitators for the training as well as facilitators to help the different districts get together and talk about their higher level needs in terms of threat assessments.
So we continue to work with our students, and our full-time staff continue to work with our students.
That initial first tier that I mentioned, that is done by teachers and building administrators and building counselors.
And the second tier?
That would be district level as combined with YFS and MIPD.
So again, community
resources. Yep.
And I think the real benefit of that, just quickly, is we can support students in real time, particularly those who may not be able to come to school either through suspensions or short or long-term suspensions. But we're talking about the resources being right here, which means we can support that student right away and start talking about reintegration plans and immediate access back to the school environment rather than waiting for outside resources, whether or not that's the consortium or, as Ty said, sometimes some of the other private contracts that we've had to do where scheduling is very difficult. So it keeps it right here in our own community, much like our Community Truancy Board is trying to work with students right here in our community itself.
And then finally, is there any student data that we share up with this consortium in any way?
I don't believe that there would be any permanent storage of data. I believe that cases would be potentially discussed, but there is an inclusion within this model and within the cooperative of confidentiality waivers. You will sign that every member who becomes a part of this team, or resource team, signs a confidentiality agreement that they will not disclose any specific data about students. So it's very tied in to protecting the student's identity as well. And there's also, I mean, if there is a threat, if a student is found to be a threat and he's threatening other students, there are protection plans for the students who are threatened. So it's not just looking at the student, but also how do we protect the larger population. So.
And then we spend quite a bit of time ensuring equity and, you know, we're not favoring or disfavoring certain groups. How does all that type of accountability happen with this cooperative?
So the model, as it's built, the forms that are designed do not include any indication of race or age. Well, I mean, there's age. Obviously, you need age. But there's no inclusion of what the race of the individual is or what their ethnic background is. So it tries to remove some of those data points from the discussion. It's really about what is going on in the student's life. What is the behavior of the student? And that information will not be shared. And it won't become part of the official record of the support that's provided. I mean, the larger context of equity and diversity can be discussed as part of the fact-finding process in that initial intervention, but it's more about what is the larger context in the life of the student. It's about that individual.
Yeah, I think it's helpful when we look at, I think it's ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences that we're trying to understand and trying to provide support and help for. I think it's great when it's from the community and there's a close relationship with the child and the parents and potentially the neighbors and things like that. And really my only concern here is the further distant we get from that, you know, don't know how that happens, don't know what control we have over ensuring that good things happen and good outcomes happen, and do we have some insight into this to make sure that we are having the positive outcomes we intend to have.
Sure. So this model does keep it very close to the student so that it's those who are working with the student. The co-op provides training for our staff, which currently we don't have in all aspects. So, for example, in our current model, when a student has a disciplinary action and there's a concern and a threat assessment has to be made, we contract that out. And as Fred mentioned, we're sort of at that individual's timetable and calendar, and so it could be months out, whereas this is going to provide our employees, our staff, the skills to be able to go through the process with our students, building on what they know about the student that's culturally responsive, trauma-informed as for that student within their world and their life. Certainly at the very first level initially, and then as it builds, bringing in more of our employees at the higher levels to work through the process and work with the students.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
All right, so
I just wanted to say is I'm the representative for the high school PAC, and what I'm hearing consistently, what I've been hearing consistently through the year is that teachers are often at a loss as to helping students through traumatic experiences. And so one of the things that in reviewing this that I really liked was it seemed to include that training for teachers as well as their involvement. And I think that what Principal Puckett would tell us is that, you know, teachers were at a loss as to how to help their students through it and wanted to be helpful. So.
And it sounds like this group would have additional resources that teachers can refer students in need to. So that seems valuable as well, as opposed to the entire burden being on the shoulders of that one teacher.
It has a team concept to it as well, so one person doesn't feel like they're in it on their own. There's other resources for them at their site because others have been trained in these same processes and analysis of where students are. And some of the flow chart, from my understanding, is that it's even done as a team.
One last comment. And an appreciation to King County, what is it Puget Sound Educational District for doing this. You know, it sounds like they're just kind of, in a way, being a clearinghouse for best practices and helping organize and train. And, you know, we are fortunate to have our MIYFS and our high school PTA involved in the UW forefront for suicide prevention, which is terrific. And maybe this is, if anybody's talking to Puget Sound Educational District, maybe that's something they could do, kind of like they're doing this, but to help spread the word for other districts in our area, because I think we're unique as our Mercer Island School District participating with Forefront. I don't think very many school districts are. So.
okay, I'm looking for a motion to approve the PSESD Regional Threat Assessment Cooperative Interlocal Cooperative Agreement.
I move that our district participate as a member of the School Safety Cooperative pursuant to the interlocal agreement as presented.
Second?
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
That was all 5 of us, right? Okay. And thank you, Ty, very much for presenting that. Our next item is regarding Board Policy 1410 for executive or closed sessions, and this is a first reading.
So this is a first reading, and what has occurred here is I, coming from a different system, have repeatedly asked questions of Kendall and staff and even board members for clarification, and board members have asked me which is which and when do we do what. And so in our research of it, we looked at the WASDA model and found that it seemed much more clear than our current model in explaining what the RCW says in the way of executive or closed session. And so before you is the WASDA model that we would like to have the board consider as adopting for replacement for Board Policy 1410. And you can see we redlined out the old and inserted the new for your view. Are there any questions on either the old or the new?
I had one. In Section 1, Item G, to evaluate the qualifications of a candidate for appointment to the board. However, any interview of such candidate and final action appointing a candidate to the board will be in a meeting open to the public. So what kind of candidate is this?
So this is when there's a board vacancy
Oh, okay.
for appointment to the board. So when you're looking at, for whatever reason, you get a mid-term, so to speak,
Okay, it's
vacancy
not
to the board.
a hiring
No.
practice. I was
No.
confused by that. Thank you for the clarification.
My question, it doesn't matter so much, but I see that our original policy was adopted in 1983. And I'm just curious if the WASDA model policy didn't exist then, if there was a reason when the WASDA policy was created, and we can make assumptions. I'm just wondering why.
Yeah, I was in,
I know you
I don't
weren't
know.
here.
With Jennifer,
Jennifer?
maybe was
I'm not
in-
sure. Oh.
I don't think we
I was
have
gonna
that
say,
institutional knowledge
I don't think
now.
Jennifer was here in 1983.
I was not.
Okay.
I was, as a student. Okay.
We don't
So-
have video archives going back.
I think what had happened was we did have the policy, and when our numbers were converted to match the WASDA numbers, so 1410 was probably assigned to this one when we adopted all of the numbers. But from what I would understand, there hasn't been any adjustments. You can also note at the bottom where it says 2017 July issue. So we get updates from WASDA as to here's some changes that have occurred in the law, here's some recommendations to update policy. So this was one that had been a suggestion in July.
So, in the executive session, for example, at the first paragraph, it suggests the board president will publicly announce. Does that mean there will be no other announcement required, such as in board docs and/or published potentially in the reporter and such? Or is that covered in another policy? Because this speaks explicitly about convening the executive session.
Can I chime in here? Because I had a question that's similar to yours in a way, but don't let me detour your question. So in Section 2, under closed, it says public notice is not required prior to holding a closed session. I was just wondering, if we're stating that, then why isn't there kind of a similar statement
Yes, right.
mirroring one, saying public notice is required. Or
Yes.
in stating the process for that. And I guess, David, your question is the public notice only the president stating it maybe during 5 minutes before, or?
I think you've pulled it together nicely.
We could certainly add that if you felt it was important to have, that it will be part of the notification. We could also check to see if that's in a different place of where we notify for meetings. The exempt, the Part 2 sessions do not have to be noticed, but our practice is to notice. Executive sessions should be noticed, so that is something that is specific in the RCW. Erin, do you have?
We can amend the policy to reflect what the notice requirements are for each of the sessions, both executive and exempt. So when we bring it back, we can make sure it parallels the applicable notice requirements, if that would make you all more comfortable. Okay, great.
Sounds like a good amendment. Thanks.
And then another thought is, I mean, in practice, we have been giving public notice to these closed sessions or private meetings in Section 2. And I'm personally kind of in favor of that. And I'm wondering if we do this now and accept this, are we going to stop as a practice? I mean, can we have a policy, this 1410, that kind of goes above and beyond RCW? You know, just so that we
Well, I think
continue to do this practice, which I think is a good practice.
So it says it's not required, so you might want to put in there, but this board would like to continue the practice or something like that.
From a historical perspective, the use of the closed session without prior notice has been in the moment. So I would say that generally, past boards have always noticed the closed sessions if they knew they were coming, but sometimes there's things that happen in the moment. I remember some lease agreements where there's some legal matters that were initially in closed session that just came up at the meeting, and so we would have had to stop the entire discussion and hold it 2 weeks later had we not been able to make this closed session without notice.
I can tell you California experience. California has a law that says you do have to notice, but a closed session can be held as a special meeting, and you have to provide notice with 24 hours. So you have a smaller window. So if you had kind of an emergency situation and we've got to have a decision on this, and it's something that falls within the safe harbor, so to speak, of the closed session provisions, you could notice it as a special meeting. It can still be an exempt or a closed and do a 24-hour notification. So I am also used to you notice, but you notice it as it's a closed session or an exempt session, and you just put what the safe harbor is. For exempt, it's things like a quasi-judicial, just as it's listed here, and that's all you put to maintain any kind of confidentiality that you need to maintain. But we could certainly add something in that we will notice both executive and closed session. But there can be times when you might need to hold them, as Jennifer mentioned. I hate to say an emergency, but sometimes it can be we need to have, information quickly, and so you can still notice, but it might be a shorter notice than your regular meeting notice.
There was a provision, I believe, that during a regular meeting, we could call as needed an impromptu executive or closed session. Is that correct?
That's, and you can call an impromptu executive session, but you have to publicly state that you're going into executive session and when you will be returning. And there is no notice requirement of the same, meaning you don't have to announce it 2 days before, 24 hours in advance, et cetera.
And that's the similar case with closed as well, is it not? The only point I'm getting to is if we were having a regular meeting like this and the discussion moved into one of these topics, we would be under no obligation to have done a 24-hour notice. The president could have declared it,
Correct.
and we could have recessed and returned. So really, the only interest in noticing is when we create these meetings outside of the regular meeting, hence being planned, and then we properly notice. And then I believe there's also a provision for emergency meetings to be called impromptu as well without the notice.
Yeah, and I'm going to chime in here. Sorry, I don't know if people can see me, but this is Erin Battersby speaking from the district. There are different notice requirements depending on what's going on, and I think it's just probably best if we do research and update the policy so that we're consistent with what the requirements are. But you are correct in that you can go into executive session just by noticing it in the meeting, by publicly stating that. And then there's all sorts of exceptions in case of emergency situation when it has to do with injury, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's just best, my advice to the board would be that we update this to reflect the notice requirements of the various applicable RCWs and laws and move forward with that. In terms of, I think it's been our practice to notice in advance if we intend to have these sessions. We did go back all the way to at least early 2015, and that has in fact been our practice, is to make it notify the public that they will be occurring with limited information, obviously, because there's reasons why they're exempt or executive sessions. And I don't think there's anything that would prevent us from continuing that practice, but I would hesitate to put it in a policy only because there are times when we will not be noticing in case, for example, you wanted to enter into an executive session partway through because of something that came up that day or at the beginning of the meeting. So that would be my advice to the board, but I'm happy to draft anything that you request.
So that's actually the point I was going to make is, you know, I think WASDA spent a lot of time with the policies. We want to be open and public and transparent, and yet not be restricted from taking action when we need to. And I think that, you know, if we want to put in somewhere that it's the intent to always provide notice when possible, and as much notice, then I think a statement like that is appropriate. But I think that we need to leave ourselves an out that, or the ability to act when we need to.
Okay. So we'll expect some changes to this, and we'll have the second reading at the May 10th.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to provide a red line so you can see it.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to item D. Board Policy 2020, successfully preparing students for the cognitive, global, and digital world, strategic planning review. So Donna's going to take us through this.
So this is just here. There is no action required for this item, as the board has been holding some prior workshop sessions and has some future study session and workshop sessions planned. The 2020 policy vision has been discussed, mentioned, and so as we move forward with those study sessions, as we're strategic planning, it's important to let the public know that this is becoming part of that discussion as we move forward in these planning study sessions.
Any questions about that?
I just want to say thank you to Superintendent Kolosky and President Drinkwater for holding these sessions and providing input or feedback back to the public when we've had them, and the current status of them. So thank you very much for having done that. The last meeting, we were supposed to have a linkage with the community earlier, but hopefully we will try that once again as we have more input to provide for the community to at least react to. So thank you very much for your work on this.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to full governance, process monitoring, and language review. We have Board Policy 1800 OE7, Financial Administration Monitoring Report. And Ty.
Good evening, directors. This is our annual report on financial administration about the ongoing, our report on the ongoing procedures and controls necessary to ensure proper financial management. As we ensure that there are proper procedures necessary to protect the accounting protect and account for district funds and complete and accurate financial records in accordance with the accounting system prescribed by Washington State and the accounting manual for school districts, as well as ensuring district reports and filings are required by any governmental agency are filed on time and are accurate. We keep you informed of our financial condition, including providing cash flow analysis for each fund and budget status reports, as well as authorizing only expenditures that are within the adopted budget and that they are based on reasonable judgment. Maintain adequate budget reserves to meet the financial requirements of bond rating agencies. Only incur debt that is necessary and allowed by the adopted budget. Prevent unauthorized transfer of monies from one fund to another. Settle payroll and other financial obligations in a timely manner. And reasonably pursue receivables. The district is asking for your approval of our compliance with these principles under OE 7.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move that we determine district in compliance with Board Policy 1800 OE 7.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, Ty. Okay, the next one is Board Policy 1009, Board Members Code of Conduct. And I think in recent practice, we have read through these, so we'll do that again. I'll start with the preamble. The board commits itself and its members to ethical, businesslike, and lawful conduct, including proper use of authority and appropriate decorum when acting as board members. Accordingly, can I pass that off to David? We'll round robin it.
Sure. 1, board members will represent the interests of the residents of the entire Mercer Island School District. This accountability to the whole district supersedes A, any conflicting loyalty a member may have to other advocacy or interest groups, B, loyalty based upon membership on other boards or staffs, C, conflicts based upon the personal interest of any board member who also is a relative guardian of a student in the district, and D, conflicts based upon being a relative of an employee of the district.
Thank you. Number 2, Brian?
Board members may not attempt to exercise individual authority over the organization. A, board members' interactions with the superintendent with staff must recognize the lack of authority vested in individuals except when explicitly authorized by the board. B, board members' interaction with the public, press, or other entities must recognize the same limitation and the inability of any board member to speak for the board except to repeat explicitly stated board decisions. C, board members will not publicly express individual negative judgments about the superintendent or staff performance. Any such expressions of negative opinion regarding the superintendent's or staff members' performance will be made only by the board after reviewing the employee performance issue in question in executive session and therefore taking appropriate action stating the grounds for the opinion in an open public session.
Thank you. And number 3, Deborah?
Number 3, to build trust among members and to ensure an environment conducive to effective governance. Members will, A, focus on issues rather than personalities. B, respect decisions of the full board. C, exercise honesty in all written and interpersonal interaction, never intentionally misleading or misinforming each other. D, acknowledge strengths and progress. E, make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district and one another. F, never embarrass each other or the district. G, keep communications short and respectful. H, choose words and tone carefully when criticizing and comment constructively. I, avoid surprises by providing a heads up to the superintendent and fellow board members. And J, email or speak with the superintendent about board issues. Meet periodically with the superintendent for board education.
Thank you. Number 4, Ralph?
Members shall maintain confidentiality appropriate to sensitive issues and information that otherwise may tend to compromise the integrity or legal standing of the board, especially those matters discussed in executive and/or exempt session.
And number 5, in the event a member incurs personal conflict of interest related to any matter before the board, the member shall disclose the conflict to the board prior to discussion of such matter. And do we want to do 5 individual motions? Or just one? If you feel strongly about either, go ahead and make the first motion.
I move that we find the board in compliance with Board Policy 1009, Board Members Code of Conduct.
Go ahead.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Motion passes 5-0. And our next one is Board Policy 1010, Board Member Conflict of Interest. And we'll do the same thing. The board members are expected to avoid conflicts of interest involving any matter pending before the board. A conflict of interest is deemed to exist when a member is confronted with an issue in which the member has a financial interest or an issue or circumstance that could render the member unable to devote complete loyalty or singleness of purpose to the public interest or other conduct prohibited under RCW 4223-030 or RCW 4223-070. Whenever there is a question of a potential conflict, the board will determine if such a conflict is a material one. Accordingly, and why don't we go in reverse order this time? Ralph, would you like to start with number 1? You got a short one last time.
I know. Let's see. 1, RCW 42.23.070 expects board members to follow a code of ethics and disallows certain actions that create a conflict of interest. While board members are expected to adhere to the full RCW, some specific items are highlighted here. A board member shall not use his or her position to secure special privileges or exemptions for himself, herself, or others. B, a school board member shall not accept any compensation, gift, reward, or gratuity for a matter connected with or related to the officer's position, except from the district. C, a school board member shall not accept employment or engage in business or professional activity that the board might reasonably expect would require or induce him or her to, by reason of his or her official position, to disclose confidential information acquired by reason of his or her official position. Some examples include directing school district staff and advocating or consulting in areas that may be for or against the school district unless the position is explicitly defined and appointed by the school board. D, a school board member shall not disclose confidential information gained by reason of their position, nor may they otherwise use such information for his or her personal gain or benefit.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Number 2, Deborah, please.
Number 2, if a board member has a potential conflict of interest resulting from a personal interest in any matter pending before the board, the member shall disclose such interest to the board, and the board will determine if such conflict is a material one. If the conflict is determined to be a material one, the member shall not vote on the matter and shall not attempt to influence the decisions of other board members, and the board member's interest shall be disclosed to all other board members and noted in the minutes of the board meeting prior to any vote on the matter.
Thank you. Number 3, Brian.
3, if a board member has a financial interest in any contractual matter pending before the board that is permitted under Chapter 42.23.030, the member shall disclose such interest to the board, shall not vote on the matter, and shall not attempt to influence the decision of other board members, and the board member's interest shall be disclosed to all of the board members and noted in the minutes of the board meeting prior to any approval of the contract.
Thank you. Number 4, David.
A member of the board shall not also be an employee of the district, nor shall a member receive any compensation for services rendered to the district, unless otherwise provided for under these policies and state law. This provision shall not prohibit members from receiving reimbursement for authorized expenses incurred during the performance of board duties.
Thank you. And I'll read 5 and 6. Number 5, the board shall not enter into any contract with any of its members or with a firm in which a member has a financial interest. And number 6, that one's long. A board member is expected to avoid conflict of interest in the exercise of the member's fiduciary responsibility. Accordingly, a board member may not, A, disclose or use confidential information acquired during the performance of official duties as a means to further the board member's own personal financial interests or the interests of a member of the board's members' immediate family. B, accept a gift of substantial value or economic benefit which would tend to improperly influence a reasonable person, or which the board member knows or should know is primarily for the purpose of a reward for official action. C, engage in a substantial financial transaction for private business purposes with a person whom the board member directly or indirectly supervises. And or D, perform an official act which directly confers an economic benefit on a business in which the board member has a substantial financial interest or is engaged as a counsel, consultant, representative, or agent. And we can do these one at a time or in one fell swoop. So whoever would like to make the motion.
I'll make a motion that we're in compliance with all these.
I second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. And now we have the consent agenda, and I've been informed that due to the Skyward problem of the week, when Skyward was down for several days, we're unable to produce the finance report that is item F on the consent agenda.
Correct.
So I'm going to pull that off of the consent agenda, and we will address it at the next regular meeting when it's available, which Skyward is now up, so we should be able to have that. So that being said, do I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Consent agenda passes minus the report, the finance report. Okay, and next we have superintendent report. Donna?
So I just have a couple of things this evening. First being that we had the audit team come to conclude the 16-17 financial and accountability audit. Tracy, myself, Ty, and Jackie and Liz were all a part of that. And from Liz, she says, I'm happy to report that the district received a clean audit. The audit team did not find any issues of material noncompliance, and the final report will be, and I think might already be available maybe by tomorrow, they said, on the state auditor's website, so that everyone will be able to see it. And as we said, everything was clean. There was no major findings during the exit conference, so all good news. Secondly, just to report earlier this week on Wednesday, actually, Principal Puckett and I met with the leadership class at the high school and talked with them about the student representative on the governing board, and there was a lot of positive feedback from the students. They really liked the idea, and so we kind of talked through with them what it would look like to implement for them as students, processes and procedures as to how would it look within the class, how would they report to other students, kind of how it would work for them as students, and got some great impact, interest from them, as well as some great ideas. We'll go back and meet with them probably again prior to the May meeting, and at the May meeting have something for the board as a first reading. They're ready to jump in and fill out applications, and we're very positive feedback from them. So that was exciting, but we still got a little bit of work to do on that.
Can I ask a question? What is the grade level range in that class? Is it sophomores, juniors, and seniors, or does it include freshmen?
No, I believe it just includes sophomores through
seniors.
seniors, but there will be, for the student rep, it would be a junior and a senior. Are there freshmen in the leadership class? There are.
there are.
Sorry,
Thank
there
you.
are.
Okay.
But this would only be open for applications for sophomores, because they would be juniors next year and juniors as seniors.
Is that all you have?
That's all.
All right. So board reports and announcements and inquiries, starting with David.
Just a shout out to the Stanley Ann Dunham Scholarship winners from this weekend. I believe the Mercer Islanders were Gabriela Jimenez and Sophie Poole.
Actually, it was Arwa Mokdad.
Oh, it was Arwa Mokdad and Michelle King.
And Sophie Poole is.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
and Sophie Poole.
I
And then the
think
fourth
other
one was
two-
Michelle King.
The other two were from
Rainier Beach.
Yes.
And I think that, just a shout out, that I think that was very special, that last year and this year we've opened up that partnership with Rainier Beach to share in this scholarship. And I think this was new this year, that they had 2 winners from each school, right?
Yeah,
Normally they only have 1.
I believe they received more donations this year, that they were able to give more scholarships.
Oh,
which
that's
is really
well,
positive
that's
all around.
That's lovely. Win-win-win for everyone. So that's my only news. So thank you.
I met with the Island Park PAC this week, the Parent Advisory Committee. Things are going along great there as they're looking into the final few weeks of school and closing up shop. They still have some fun events coming up, so it was great to connect with them. Also, it was great to see everyone at the Breakfast of Champions earlier this week. And it sounds like they were really successful this year with that. So I look forward to hearing more about that. I do have something very specific to bring up through my kind of work as your legislative representative. I received contact over the break in between our last meeting and this one from Harlan Gallinger, who is with the Issaquah School District. We're coming up on the 2018 Washington State School Directors Association legislative positions proposal submissions. Those are due at the end of the month here, April 30th. And Harlan reached out to see if he could get some support from our board pertaining to a new school safety. It would be to promote comprehensive school safety and would be listed as a position proposal. And I thought I would just read basically the statement of support explanation. The full document is in your packet. Thank you, Kendall, for attaching that into the packet. The full statement, which is very similar to the one that we recently passed ourselves resolution, is every student who attends K-12 school in the state of Washington deserves to attend a safe school. More than 150,000 students attending more than 170 K-12 schools have experienced a shooting on campus since Columbine High School in 1999. Gun violence is the second leading cause of death in adolescents. Effort to improve school safety will require sustained and coordinated efforts that include public policy that address access to guns, social emotional curriculum K-12, access to mental health supports, improvements to building infrastructure, and comprehensive safety plans and staff training. And I did a side-by-side comparison for us, kind of in preparation for this, of our resolution to what's in this proposal. Things that absolutely share in common are calling on our state and federal legislators to create funding specifically for social emotional learning, public health research and education on firearm-related issues, and promoting or advancing gun violence prevention, coordinated delivery of mental health prevention and intervention programs between schools and communities, which is, we were just hearing about one such program earlier tonight. It rejects arming school staff for any purpose, maintains existing regulations of firearms at school, and it asks for funding for a position that provides district-wide support for and coordination of safety plans, implementation, and partnerships. So we're right on task with that in our documents here and what we're doing in our district. Some things that kind of overlap that are somewhat similar would be funding for continuing bullying prevention programs, coordination with mental health professionals for threat assessments, intervention for at-risk students, And then the additional things that weren't from our resolution or what we're currently doing in our district that would be above and beyond, perhaps, would be looking for local discretionary use of funds to include, but not limited to, expanding existing staff trainings, promoting student assemblies and peer-to-peer engagement, expanded instruction on digital citizenship, and then funding for infrastructure improvements that promote safe schools, which I think fall within our document, the intent of our document, and what we currently do in our district. The only thing that I pulled out that I would recommend maybe a change on if we supported this is in their document, in their statement of support, it lists that gun violence is the second leading cause of death in adolescents. In our resolution, it's stated as the third leading cause. We traced back, Deborah and I, to the original study that was done on that, which lists that it's the third leading cause. But that would be the one correction that I would bring to it. Otherwise, I think we're very much in line with this. And then with our support, the question that Kendall brought back to me is, would we be put on as co-presenters for this proposal, or we would just be providing support for it? And for that, I believe that Harlan is looking for us to sign on as supporters in name for this proposal. That's my presentation.
Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you, Brian, and I really appreciate the comparison and contrast, too. So it was very nice. Do you expect Issaquah to change it from 2 to 3, just out of curiosity?
I don't know. I can put that out there. I don't know that it's a deal breaker, but I would certainly send on our original information that we found. Yeah.
And I think they would be interested in making sure it's accurate, so.
With our original resolution, we did have it kind of scrubbed legally. I'm wondering if this has gone through a similar process or if we need to at this point.
I don't think it needs to, because it's going to WASDA, and then it will be vetted by the assembly there. And so, and it's more of a proposal. It's not a complete resolution like that we're adopting.
Right. I've not done a complete legislative assembly with WASDA yet,
Yeah.
but I assume that it'll be very familiar that it will go into caucus, it'll be debated, the language will be changed and adapted, and it'll be, the committee will
Right.
go through it and vet it to make sure
Right,
that everything
exactly. Yeah.
is correct.
Just out of consideration, should we ask Dawn and see if Aaron has any, if anybody has
Oh.
any concern from?
Great point. Just looking over it now, does anybody on staff feel that there's anything to be concerned about?
Without having had the opportunity to look at it in depth, I hesitate to give a legal opinion at this point in time, but I will say that I don't see, one of the biggest concerns is that you can't advocate for people to, you can't basically lobby people and encourage them to vote certain ways. So to the extent that it doesn't do that, I think it's probably okay. But again, that's a qualified statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there is a time issue with this because they need to submit it by April 30th. And so typically, when we have issues come before our board, we like to have a second reading. That's only required really for policies. So this is sort of outside that. And we could, if everyone would agree, we could vote on it right now in this meeting.
And I think everybody here recognizes we did spend a tremendous amount of time as a board talking about this.
Right.
And also, Brian and Deborah spent a tremendous amount of time individually bringing this to the board. So I'd be happy to vote for it today.
So we could take a motion and then have further discussion as well.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion?
I move that the Mercer Island School Board sign on to the Issaquah WASDA proposal on school safety.
Yeah.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? Okay.
Actually, one thing. I think we'll give Brian discretion to make the updates and/or approve changes to this as they work through this process. I'm sure this is I think as President Drinkwater pointed out, this is work in progress still. So I think Brian, as a legislative rep, has also board approval to make the updates to it. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I agree that we don't need to put in as an amendment to change the second to the third, because we can just have you recommend that they do a little bit more digging to make sure that it's accurate.
Right.
Does that sound fair? Okay. All those in favor of the motion on the table?
Aye.
Great. Motion passes. Thank you.
So just thank you for that, and I'll reach out to Harlan, Director Gallinger in Issaquah, and let him know that they have our support and that
Great.
we're happy to move forward in working with this.
And did you have anything else to report?
No, I think that covers it this time.
Great. Thank you. Deborah?
I don't have a lot to report. I did attend a high school PAC meeting last week. I'm really enjoying attending these, and I like the format that Principal Puckett is using. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, but basically she chooses a topic for each meeting, and then seeks. It's not open. It's open to all parents, not just members of the PAC. And then seeks a lot of feedback on whatever issue it is that they're discussing. So last week was on the Bridges program, and so I think it's a great opportunity for Principal Puckett to hear. Well, first of all, for parents to be educated about what is actually happening in school and not just their child's point of view, which is also important, but then also to be able to give that feedback in a really meaningful way. That I think is helping to strengthen our programs. I just want to say, I know that there's people out there watching because I get feedback on it. I was really looking forward to our linkage session today. I think it's important that we hear from our community. I'm kind of assuming that, and from what I've been hearing, that no news is good news. I think things are going really, really well. But I know that I can speak for all of the board members when community input is very important to all of us. We are representatives of the community, and we take that really seriously. We don't want to take any significant action without community input. So please reach out whenever you can, understanding that these meetings are challenging times and very heavy parental responsibilities, but as well as non-parents in the community. So please reach out, whether it's by email to the board or attending for public input or linkage sessions. I just wanted to give a shout out to our foundation for a wonderful Breakfast of Champions on Tuesday. I haven't heard any numbers yet. People were asking me yesterday. I'm like, we usually get some sort of number, but I haven't seen that, so eagerly awaiting that. It was
They did announce some numbers today on their Facebook page. I recommend everybody become a member and follow that.
and notice he's not telling us what that number is. But anyways, the turnout was excellent. The speakers were excellent. I think the Pathfinders were inspiring to everyone, and then getting the opportunity as the board to meet with them more in depth. But as alum, to hear what other alum are doing, it's just another reason to be proud of this community.
Thank you. Rob?
So in the process of advocating for public education, I'll go a step higher for advocating for public higher education. I had the opportunity to go over to the University of Washington and see a presentation by 5 electrical engineering and computer science graduate students, and they were the winning team called Sounding Board of a worldwide competition they beat out 100 other teams, 22 other that represented 22 other countries, and it was called the Alexa Prize. It was a front end of was the Amazon Alexa, and
Echo, the voice recognition.
Thank you. And they were putting a front end on it to essentially do conversational artificial intelligence and essentially encourage people to engage with it. And a tremendous amount of creativity and passion. Another call out for the UW Computer Science Department for having, I think, 35 to 40% women which is tremendously a lot more than traditional other computer science departments. And they also received a grand prize of $500,000 for that team. This was a big competition, yeah.
Thank you. So I was also going to thank the taxpayers and community members. I'm assuming that if they didn't show up, it's because they have full trust in what we're doing. But like Deborah, I would love to see more people attend these. And so maybe we'll get more in the future, but we will take it as good news that there weren't concerns that drove people to come in vast amounts. Also next month, May 10th, I'm going to not be at this meeting because I am leaving tomorrow to go on an extended trip to congratulate my daughter from graduating from University of Washington 1 quarter early, so she gets to go on a vacation. And so I'm going to be missing the May 10th meeting. I'll be back in town on May 13th, so I'll be back for the site visit and planning session that we have after that. Vice President Jorgensen will get to exercise his duty of being backup, and I will have access to email, so if there's something important or if I get something that isn't copied to the board, I will forward that on. I'm going to miss the Northwood Pack, which is actually just called the Principal's Coffee, and so I'm looking for a substitute for that on Friday, May 11th, 9:30 to 10:30. All right, okay, awesome. And so the other thing I wanted to announce was that we are bringing back the little surveys that we do at the end of meetings to give feedback. So that will happen tonight. And we had moved a linkage session with the city from the May 10th, I forget where it was originally. Anyway, we moved it, it was tonight, and then we moved it to, at the request of the City Council, we moved it to May 24th, but they aren't able to do that evening either, so we're still working on potential dates for that, hopefully to happen in May.
Hopefully to happen in May. I hope to hear by hopefully tomorrow and be able to put it in my weekly communication to the board to block out a date. It will most likely not be attached to a regular meeting as it usually is. It will be a special meeting that will be a linkage session. So as soon as we have that date, I will get it to you so you can get it on your calendars.
I think it is going to be after I come back, so sometime after the 13th. And we'll have another four-way planning session before that too with the leadership. So we'll keep you posted on that as well. And that's all I have. Okay, anything else? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.